And what we found is that only 25% of optimism is genetic. And believe it or not, we can all learn that skill set. I see so many people want to pivot in their lives and in their careers, but they're so afraid to take chances. I'm going to fall on my face. I don't have the finances. I don't have the backing. That is pessimism. When you're beating yourself up, when you have no proof of anything negative actually happening, and it's all in your mind. I know because I've been there.
Tell me about how you got yourself out of that place.
Yes.
Dr. Sue Varma is a psychiatrist, mental health advocate, and author of the book Practical Optimism. As the first medical director of the 9/11 mental health program, she has spent her career helping people build resilience, optimism, and lasting well-being in an anxious world.
The 4 M's of mental health are movement, mindfulness, mastery, and meaningful engagement. And if you can do each one of these 10 minutes a day, a few times a week, but write it down, right? Put it in your notes section, put it in your calendar, because it's not going to happen.
If you could leave our listeners with one parting piece of advice, what would it be?
So, one question that we ask people, are you...
The future of longevity is being shaped in Geneva this October. The Global Longevity Summit is an intimate gathering at the Genolia Innovation Hub, running from October the 28th to the 30th, with pioneers like Aubrey de Grey, Matt Kaberlein, and Amy Killen. I am grateful to be joining as an advisor. And if you would like to be there too, you can get 10% off tickets with the code Beyond Tomorrow. Just check the description for the link. I'll see you there.
Sue, why do you do what you do?
Julian, the average person sees at least 5 different specialists and suffers for at least 10 years before they come to see me. And I say, why do people have to wait until they've spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars going to different doctors, going to the emergency room, suffering? And why do they have to wait for the other shoe to drop before they come to see a psychiatrist? So I said, I want to create a one-stop shopping approach, if you will, that is both prevention and part treatment, right? Because most people won't end up being able to afford a psychiatrist, or there's so many barriers, including cost, stigma. So how do we put the skills in people's hands? So that's what Practical Optimism and this work is about. It's equal part prevention as maintenance and treatment.
What made you go in to optimism in general?
Yes.
I know you were working with 9/11 survivors, which was, I'm sure was an insightful, somewhat traumatic experience for you.
Totally. And it was one of the darkest times in, I think, history, U.S. history, and one of the biggest sort of mass disasters / trauma, at least in my lifetime and on U.S. soil. And I'm a born and raised New Yorker. And, on 9/11 itself, I was a medical student and I was working at a hospital. And I vividly remember it was Tuesday morning, September 11, and around 8 a.m. And I remember being in a patient's room, and I was doing the morning rounds, and I looked up, and on the television in the room, both of us are seeing a plane crash into the tower. World Trade Center, and you're like, is there a movie going on? This cannot be real. And I remember very quickly on the loudspeakers, there was an announcement, discharge anyone who's healthy enough to go home, send them home. And I was like, what is happening? And I remember that we ended up discharging anyone that patients were well enough to go home, or, so that we could create openings, beds for the people we thought were going to come into the emergency room and get help. But Julian, guess what? We waited and waited and waited, and nobody came because the death toll was so high. And it was one of the most devastating things, because here you are, like, you're young, you're in your 20s, you go into the medical profession because you want to make a difference in the world. You believe in the best in people. And I have to say, for most of my life, I have been one of those people who, up until that point, at least, did believe in the best in people. But if there's anything that's going to change or shake your faith in humanity, it's going to be something like that. And so I said, it took me years to sort of come out of it, because as a New Yorker like you, were smelling it every day. People were afraid to take public transportation. The dust, the rubble, many of my friends and colleagues, I lost people. And patients that I ended up treating, fast forward 5 or 7 years when I became medical director of this 9/11 mental health program, the death and devastation, you're covered with blood that day, you're running away, one tower is collapsing, you're seeing people jumping out of buildings. I mean, it was horrific, and there's no way to put words into it. And it didn't matter whether or not you lived in New York or you lived in Kansas. We know that from surveys taken in the days after 9/11 that people were extremely affected and the stress levels were high no matter where you lived. And that was one thing I felt like 9/11 and also then the pandemic was one thing that in some strange, sick way, if you will, unified us. Because it didn't matter what part of the world you were, your humanity reached out and had empathy for what people had gone through.
How does someone know if they're an optimist or a pessimist? And how does one define optimism in this scale?
Yes. So, quick thing that I sometimes ask people, imagine that you're going to a friend's wedding. And I'm going to ask you this, Julian. So imagine you're going to a friend's wedding and this is a very good friend of yours and you leave home, about an hour earlier. And you're like, it's only 20 minutes away, but I'll get there. And then you're driving and soon you hit traffic and you are stuck in bumper to bumper traffic. And you can see the time go by and your friend was like, you're my best mate. You got to be there. We're going to get photos done. And you're like, oh my God, I'm going to let him down. Where does your brain go? Does it say things are going to work out? The traffic's going to start moving and I'll get there, no problem? Or do you start to think, man, this always happens to me. Why did I do this? Or people suck. Why does it always have to be a traffic? Why this hour? So which of those two would you say? Where does your mind go?
Personally, I would say for the most part, I'm an optimist, but there's definitely part of me that can be very scarce. And that's something that I've been really trying to address. Because I know that when I'm feeling abundant and optimistic, things just happen for me. Life just works so much better.
Yeah.
But just to go a bit deeper into this, and I don't know if people that are listening believe in kind of generational trauma or experiences or at a cellular level how we take on from our ancestors, but I have parents that went through civil war. I've had grandparents who went through civil war and famine, and great grandparents who went through a great famine that wiped out half of the country of my parents' origin. So
No, you're 100% right that like so much of our thinking about optimism, pessimism can be culturally shaped, but what you're talking about is intergenerationally shaped, right? So we do this idea of epigenetics that our environment very much modifies the way that our genes are expressed. So, going back to that example that, if you're sitting in traffic, if you thought to yourself, like, and not just in this example, but in many examples across life, if you're someone who is in the midst of hardship, you say to yourself, things will work out. I would say, generally speaking, you're an optimist, right? An optimism just simply is this natural predisposition, this natural tendency to see the glass as half full as opposed to half empty. And if you're someone who, when you're stuck in a bind in life in general, you have an idea, it's not going to work out. Why does this always happen to me? Whether it's a victim mentality or just that other people can't get their act together. Why are they always late? Why can't they follow the rules? Drivers don't know how to drive. If you have a tendency to blame, to externalize, to assume the worst case, I'm not going to get there on time, I'm not going to be in the picture, she's going to be so mad, you have a tendency to be a pessimist. So, and again, number one, there's no right answer, right? And I'm not going to say that one is better than the other because believe it or not, Julian, there is as much as I'm going to talk about the benefits of optimism and their head-to-toe benefits from longevity, mental health, living longer, less depression, less anxiety, 30% less cardiac problems, 30% less strokes. People are 40% more likely to get a raise in the next year, 5 times more likely to be engaged in their work. Optimism can lead to this, 6 times less likely to be burnt out. So optimism truly has head-to-toe benefits. So as much as I'm going to say that there's a million benefits, pessimism, believe it or not, also has its own benefits, but just a small, healthy amount of skepticism. And the world needs both. So I say that the optimists build the planes and the pessimists build the parachutes. And we need both.
I love that saying. So with that in mind, is there like a spectrum of being too optimistic? I know that there is a spectrum of being too pessimistic.
Yes.
But too much optimism.
Yes. So, too much optimism can present itself in a variety of ways. One is that it's something called the ostrich effect, where you bury your head in the sand and you just imagine that all your problems will disappear.
Yeah.
And the way that this shows out is that a person may not follow up, for example, on an annual health exam. And the doctor said, there's something's brewing in your lab test. I'm a little skeptical. I'm a little worried. The extreme optimist will say it'll all work out. And I don't need to follow up a test. So they may not even go to their annual physical exam for a checkup. Or if the doctor says something is a little worrisome, they don't follow up on it. They just bury their head in the sand. Or the credit card debt keeps increasing, right? So, or like they're impulsive, or they're gambling, or they're giving money out to friends all the time, and they believe in the best in them, even though their friends have never paid them back. And they're like, no, it'll be fine. Everything will work itself out. So that's an extreme where you're in denial of reality. And they might be happy-go-lucky people, but they're not necessarily doing the best in life because they're not being smart and they're not being wise and cautious. I say like trust but verify, right? So do keep an open mind always, right? But then when you get information that says, I don't know, this person's a little sketch or this course correct, they take a little bit too long. On the other hand, the extreme pessimist, while in general pessimism leads to a little bit more thorough research, we know that pessimists are more accurate in their assessment. They do their due diligence. They read the book, but they'll never act on it. So I have many patients who will come in and, for example, somebody was like, doc, I need a new computer. I was meant to get a new phone, but I just started researching it and I went down a rabbit hole and I can't decide. Like I'm overwhelmed, decision paralysis, analysis paralysis. So the pessimists, they do 4 things. These are the 4 P's of pessimism. So if you're familiar with the work of Dr. Martin Seligman, he talks about the 3 P's of pessimism, which is that pessimists tend to think negatively and they think that the negative things are permanent. So something bad, it'll never get better. They take it personally and they think that the negative things are pervasive. So this bad thing that happened to me because I suck or this person doesn't like me, it's going to now happen in all aspects of my life. Like people are bad, people can't be trusted. They'll make blanket generalizations about themselves, about the future, about the world. And I added a 4th P, which is as a result of this, they become paralyzed, right? And you see the extreme optimist, everything's fine. They don't act, they're passive. And the extreme pessimist, out of fear, it doesn't act. So both sides. And you had mentioned, and I thought it was so interesting, this observation, you said maybe, Sue, this extreme optimism could be because of fear. And I never thought of that. I thought, wow, that is interesting because on the outside, these people are happy-go-lucky and chipper, but maybe they're avoiding something very emotionally painful. Like imagine, like I've seen this in my own family, that there's a family member that has a tendency to be not so nice, right? And the optimist will be like, just forgive them, right? But then they keep repeating it. So, you have to kind of be somewhere in the middle. And that's what, to me, practical optimism is that number one, it marries the best of pessimism, the healthy skepticism, with the action and the proactivity of an optimist.
And the beauty of that is we can write our own destiny because it doesn't matter if you're a huge pessimist or you're a hyper optimist. Going back to it, and just for our listeners to know, we just got off stage. We were doing a fireside at Copenhagen Health Week, and I'm so excited to have you here and go deeper on a conversation. But this idea that hyper optimists are potentially led by fear. That was just an observation from some of the friends that I have that they're just like, everything's well, and it's always like, okay, what's going on deeper here? And then obviously the people are very pessimistic. That's, at least they're not in denial potentially.
Yes.
There's something nice about that.
And they're smart. I hate to say, maybe in some way smarter, because they see everything, right?
Yeah.
But when you see everything and then you don't do anything because you know too much, that's also a problem,
It's funny because they see everything in their own vista. I think the issue is, and the reason why I'm optimistic about the world and where we're going, is that there's so much we can't see.
Yeah.
Because we are right now in 2025 and we only know what we know.
Yes.
I quote this theory pretty much every other day now, but the pessimistic meta-induction theory is the idea that science is the most accurate version of the truth today. It doesn't mean it's going to be true tomorrow or in 5 years, 10 years. The needle is moving so fast. Galileo thought the world was round after many people thought it was flat. We don't know whether we're in a simulation or whatever. It doesn't matter what religious viewpoint or whatever. We could be in the Truman Show. There's still so much we don't know, and so I think that's where my kind of optimism comes. But back on track with Julian.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's also like a sign of intellectual humility, and that was so important to me. That like you're always open to the idea that you could be wrong, right? And I think most people are not okay with that, right? And it's very unsettling. And I understand pessimism sometimes is about wanting a certainty so much so that you rather hold on to a negative certain idea than to allow for the possibility of positive. Like, for example, a student may say, I just need to know my test score. I took the SATs or whatever big entrance exam. And I'd rather know that I failed right now than the possibility of waiting 5 days and knowing that I did really well. Just get it over with, right? Because they have a very hard time it's very unsettling for some people. And there's a specific type of person that doesn't deal with uncertainty well, and that is the pessimistic type.
Take me to some brain scans. I really want to understand like the neuroplasticity of, or just the neural network of someone that's a pessimist versus an optimist, and how that process shifts as we get onto the practical optimism tips that you're going to be giving to us.
Yes. And, for me, like as a physician, it's hard for me to get a buy-in to anything unless there's like research behind it and neuroscience. And that's what I found so fascinating to me is that, optimism really is genetic, first of all, and I think that's why nobody really looked at it to begin with, because they said you're either born with it or you're not. So who cares? Move on, right? If I'm not one of those people. And what we found is that only 25% of optimism is genetic. And what it codes for is a certain gene, the oxytocin receptor gene. But what those genes code for is a specific skill set. And believe it or not, we can all learn that skill set. But the people who skew pessimistic naturally, if you were to scan their brain, or if you were to say, hey, I'm going to give you a photo of a car accident, and I want you to envision something negative. Just give me the worst case scenario, that something that's after this car wreck. And then if you can induce a pessimistic episode in someone. And like if you were to say, look at this picture, imagine the worst case. And then I'm going to say, somebody died here, something really bad happened. In that brain scan, you're going to start seeing the right side of my brain light up. And that is associated with negative thoughts, with fear, with higher amygdala activity, fight or flight. If you tell the same person, now take this picture and let's imagine something really positive. Give me the best case scenario, right? And that person may say, oh, everyone walked away alive, nobody got hurt. And in fact, these two people who collided, now they're romantic partners and they're living happily ever after. So whatever that best case scenario for that person might be, now the left side of the brain is lighting up. And so what we know is that we can actually take people and prescribe them, if you will, a brief positive intervention, a brief optimism intervention, best possible scenario, imagine the best thing. And we can skew the left brain activity to increase. And that promotes a sense of well-being, of gratitude. Optimists even sleep better, right? Like it's like every aspect of the brain, their mood improves over time. So I would say even like 2 or 3 times a week, if you were to visualize in your mind a problem and then imagine a pathway to the solution and then envision what it feels like to envelope yourself with all that positivity of accomplishing, I did it, the mastery that comes, right? And what we find is it's not really your capabilities in life. Like that's almost like, I take that almost for granted. That's like a starting point. That's the floor. But your ceiling is really going to be how much you allow for possibility. How much are you allowed to dream, right? So have capability. I'm not saying fake it till you make it and, fake it your entire life. Do the due diligence, get your training, whatever field that you're trying to succeed in. But without the positivity and without the confidence, belief in the possibility of good, because that's all optimism is. It is the positive outcome expectation, the possibility of good things happening, right? You're going to hit your ceiling too fast if you don't allow yourself the possibility of uncertainty for good things to happen.
We're going to get into how we can help, how you can help people move away from pessimism and become more optimistic about this crazy world we live in, which we'll go deep into. And I just want to share that I feel I grew up as an optimist. And then after a few things that happened to me in my 20s, I became, as my twin sister used to call me, EP, eternal pessimist.
Oh, no way.
And actually I think naturally I learned a lot of the practical optimism tips that you're going to share with us. But where does someone start? Let's say one of our listeners is in a really, really rough place. They are in a dark hole and they have no idea where to start.
Yes. So first thing I would say is just make sure, right? Like, is this everyday pessimism, normal garden variety pessimism, or is it starting to skew depression, right? And being that I am a physician and I have worked with people, thousands of people at this point, specifically for the treatment of depression, I can tell you how it looks different. If you're finding that you have lost faith in the world and humanity, your energy is lower. Your mood is lower. You don't get pleasure and enjoyment out of the things that you once used to. Your mood is low, on a scale of 1 to 10, if 10 is the best, you say my mood is like a 3 or a 4 most days. Yep. And you're having difficulty functioning, of checking all the boxes, getting work done, showing up to work on time. then think that maybe this is more than just pessimism, right? This could be a depression and I should talk to a behavioral health specialist. And there's so many treatments that don't necessarily involve antidepressant medication. But, the audience here today at Copenhagen Health, we'd asked that question. How do you know, when it's time for it? And I say it's a very individual decision. But when medication is indicated after a thorough assessment, medical assessment, psychosocial, behavioral, then it can be life-saving and life-changing. And especially if you're thinking life is not worth living and had previous history of depression or medications have worked for you in the past. So I just want to put that out there, that let's separate depression, because often pessimism is a slippery slope if it's left unchecked. And that's why it's so important for me that practical optimism is not just woo-woo feel-good. There is medical backing, scientific backing, and I look at it as part prevention, part maintenance, and part treatment. So I'm not going to say that practical optimism in and of itself can replace the well-trained expertise of individualized treatment with a therapist, with your own doctor, but it certainly is a very important adjunct. So putting aside the folks that have depression, for example, that the pessimism is so dark, if you're garden variety, which is, no, I feel like I have meaning in my life, I feel like I have purpose, I feel like I matter, I have friendships, I have work that feels good to me, but I have to be honest, I don't feel like I'm living my full potential because I'm not taking chances, because I'm playing small. And I see that a lot. I see so many people want to pivot in their lives and in their careers, but they're so afraid to take chances. I'm going to fall on my face. I don't have the finances. I don't have the backing. That is pessimism.
Yeah.
When you're beating yourself up, when you have no proof of anything negative actually happening, and it's all in your mind, and I know because I've been there. This rumination, this tape. Oh my God, this.
Tell me about
shit.
that.
Yeah.
Tell me about how you got yourself out of that place.
Yes.
And when you recognized you were in that place as well.
Yeah. So, there have been several incidents in my life, and I noticed that the theme is change, and not being sure that I'm going to be able to handle it, or, and that's what anxiety is about. It is overestimating danger and threat, and it's underestimating your own ability to handle it. So, while I could probably list at least 4 or 5, but one big one, which was very evident of, oh, wow, okay, I need to do something about this, was, I was in my late 20s and I was living in New York City, and, by the outside, everybody would be like, you're doing great. You're at a top program. You finished medical school. You're training in residency in psychiatry at one of the best places in the world. You're young, you're fit, you're going out, you have friends, you're doing cool things. But I remember working 100 hours a week in 5 different hospitals. And, in medicine, you don't really count or as a person. The idea is, of course, you're superhuman. You're a doctor. You've made it this far. Your role is to serve. And also coming from a South Asian background, being a daughter, service, humility, you be in the background, subservience. Those were the values that I was raised with. And those values in my culture, ethnic culture, identity, very much match with medicine, where it's a hierarchy and it's this old school boys club where especially women aren't treated with the same amount of respect. Now I think things have changed in the last 20 years, but you don't see a lot of women in these high positions as you don't in other places. And so this combination all was kind of, I would say, a perfect storm for when I get a call one day that my mom is telling me that she had stage 3 breast cancer. And my heart dropped because while breast cancer is very treatable, she had an underlying heart disease, heart failure, and the chemotherapy for the breast cancer would have basically killed him. And so I'm thinking, what do you do, right? Is she going to die from the breast cancer or is she going to die from the chemo, right? And again, I'm in my 20s, I'm not married yet, and I was like, I want you to walk down the aisle with me. I want you to see your grandkids. I had all these plans for myself and my life. And my mom very much was the matriarch of our family. And both my parents, amazing people, have done a lot for the community, mission-driven. She was hyper-educated. She graduated high school at 13, had 4 bachelors by 18, 4 masters after that, went for a PhD, and was very much fighting for women's rights, ultra-feminist, and fighting for rights of immigrants in the United States with a board of ed, getting kids tested in their own language. So I have the utmost respect. This woman is my best friend, and she's the rock of my world. And here I am where she's asking me for help, right? I'm always going to her for help. And she was like, what do I do? And I just felt it's such a loss. And I remember, we're not really allowed, we don't even have time to breathe during the day at work. And all of a sudden I have to ask for time off, which is something I've never done, because now I'm going, instead of 5 hospitals in a day where I work for my job, I'm now going to hospital to get her consultations. And no doctor wants to treat her because they're like, if I treat her, I'm going to kill her. All of a sudden I started feeling really weak in my legs. And I said, what is going on? And eventually I got, like barely an hour out of my workday to be able to see a neurologist. And she was one of the best. And, she maybe didn't have the best bedside manner, but she did a bunch of tests, EMGs, poking and prodding, needles in my legs. And she's like, you're fine. Yeah. And I was like, but I'm not. And she's like, you're fine. And I left and I felt no sense of hope of clearly my body is manifesting something, right? And I don't have the words, I don't have the time, I don't have the bandwidth to know or understand. And literally, within a couple of days, we ended up getting a lecturer, a professor that talked about mindfulness-based stress reduction. And I was so moved. And he was talking about cognitive behavioral therapy. And in psychiatry, they were telling us, you should go to, all of us, in order to be a good psychiatrist, go for your own therapy. And I said, okay, with what time and with what money, right? Like therapists, they cost hundreds of dollars an hour. Insurance doesn't pay for it. And I'm working 100 hours a week. Who am I going to see and how? Like, how am I affording this? It felt very much like a luxury. And I thought the idea of, I imagine psychoanalysis, I'm going to be laying on a couch talking about things from 20 years ago with someone who's half the time behind the couch maybe falling asleep, right? Like we had this idea of old white male Freudian therapist. And then this professor was like, cognitive behavioral therapy, action-oriented, 5 sessions, going to change your life. 45 minutes, you're not laying down on the couch, upright. And I was like, damn, sign me up. And that is the day I became a therapist ready for therapy. And Julian, can I tell you that those 5 or 8 sessions later, I went from not being able to walk or to stand, that severe leg weakness, to 100% better.
Wow.
And I was like, a couple things I learned. Your body expresses what your mind cannot. And I wasn't capable to articulate all of the conflict that I felt. I have a duty to serve my patients. I also have a duty to my family. These 2 things are not, and I don't know how to ask for what I need. And I don't know how to process impending loss, to this level. And then I also recognize that if you don't take care of your wellness, it's going to become your illness. And it became mine. So after going through the therapy, after finishing residency training, I said to myself that we have to give people skills, life skills, right? So when literally the shit hit the fan, we know how to deal with it, right? Because I didn't.
So take us through practical optimism, your 8 steps for someone, because some people, including myself, need longer than just 8 sessions, 6 sessions.
100%.
Like how?
Okay, yeah. And I don't mean in any way to minimize. If anyone's listening to this and they're like, 8 sessions, I've been in here for therapy for 8 years. And, I should say that I have gone back to therapy many times in my life, right? So that was all I had the time and affordability for. But I have gone back to that therapist throughout my life after I met her. And it has been immensely beneficial. So take as long as you need, in therapy. And sometimes it is multi-year process, right? Yeah. But just know that it doesn't have to be, because that can be really daunting to people. First thing is, what is the difference between optimism and practical optimism? And optimism is an important mindset, but really at the end of the day, that's all it is, right? It's the belief that good things can happen, but that's where it ends. And to me, practical optimism is not just a mindset. It's also an action set, a tool set, and a skill set that translates positive outlooks into positive outcomes through action. And there are 8 pillars. I start with the first one is having a purpose in life. And there's a reason why these 8 pillars are in this order, because purpose could be capital P, what's your purpose in life? Or it could be small p, what's your purpose in this moment, in this meeting, in this interaction with the 2 of us? What do we want, right? What do we want to get out of this? What do we want to share? What do we want people to know? So purpose is intention, vision, setting a goal. And the last P is practicing healthy habits, but it's really just the execution of that goal. So any goal that you have, if you're listening to this, say, okay, this is my goal. So I want you to figure out a goal. It could be a goal or it could just be better mental health, right? And what do I want? And I always say, if you can't figure out the purpose, it's your job to create it. Put the cart before the horse. A lot of people may say, my job doesn't excite me. And I would say, it's okay. First of all, your purpose doesn't have to be the same. What it was yesterday, you could have loved the career path that you're in. You could have loved the partner. Well, you could have loved the hobbies that you had. But we evolve, right? Just our purpose evolves just the way we do. So purpose yesterday doesn't have to be a purpose today. Purpose today doesn't have to be a purpose tomorrow. It's always changing.
This is such an interesting point. I've read many books about, if you don't know your purpose, your greatest purpose in life is to find your purpose. And all these sayings that I think a lot of people are probably scratching their heads thinking, like, what does it mean to feel this purpose? And I know Peter Diamandis, who's been on the podcast a few times, talks about massive transformative purpose. What is the thing that's going to energize you when you wake up on a Monday morning and energize you as you go to bed on a Sunday? It's like that sort of, and I think a lot of people are scratching their heads thinking, I have no fucking clue.
Yeah.
So where does one start? Like,
it can be the very small things, right? Like one of the things I talk about, which is somebody may say that's interesting how it comes into under your pillar of purpose, is joy and pleasure, because I feel like a lot of us are just going through the motions, and we're adding to the drudgery drawer of like the things that I need to do. So if you're feeling lost, just say, how do I get a little bit more pleasure in my life? And how do I start cultivating habits and hobbies that are for no other reason other than to give me pleasure? And it could be listening to a podcast like this. It could be listening to signing up for a class, right? Like going to meetings, going to networking events, and putting yourself out there, exploring. And the path becomes clear to you. I think, was it Rumi that said, like, our path becomes clear once we start embarking on. I'm trying to remember who said that, but the path becomes clear once you start walking on it. And a patient of mine had given me a plaque one time. She was somebody who wanted career path A. It didn't work out for her. Through therapy, we said, okay, what's the goal? She says the goal is to help people. I said, well, there's a million ways you can do that, right? It doesn't have to be through this crazy PhD program that was so intense and was going to cost her hundreds of thousands of dollars and set her back time-wise. And instead, she found a different job that ultimately led her to become a head of a wellness company, but, a decade later. But she's a big deal now, and she sent me a newspaper clipping with this plaque that said, write your purpose in pen, but your path in pencil. So if the goal is to make people happy, my God, there's a million ways. You can become a comedian to make people happy. I had a job working at McDonald's, at one point when I was a kid, and saving up money for college and for medical school, and flipping burgers and doing it so ungracefully and burning my arm and getting oil stain, and I enjoyed it. I'm like at the cashier counter and talking to people and, having fun. Like, even never think that anything is too small, too big, too menial, right? Make joy wherever you are. You can always connect what you're doing to some greater cause, right? Like families are coming to this fast food. Okay, now we're a health conference, so we're not going to be, pushing people to eat fast food. But the idea is just on a Sunday, somebody's coming with their family to enjoy, and you're a small part of their day. And how can you add in some way? So to me, purpose, a big part of it is giving back. And we find that altruism, people who volunteer 2 hours a week live longer. And people who have a strong sense of purpose in life live longer. People who give back have a strong sense of purpose. So these three things, giving back, living longer, and having a strong sense of purpose and living, they all go hand in hand. And even if you can't find a sense of purpose, exercising boosts your sense of purpose in life. One episode, 45 minutes a week. And that exercise boosts your sense of purpose, and more purpose makes you want to exercise more. So get out for a walk. If you're like, I have no clue, take a 20-minute walk around the block. Your endorphins will be going. Your brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which helps focus, concentration, mood, memory, that will increase. And you're more likely to go home and write that one email, right? Like, here today, this weekend, we've met tons of people who inspired us, who you're like, all right, I need to connect with this person. I'm going to have them on as a guest again, or they're thinking, I met Julian, I want to get on his show.
Yeah.
So anything you can do to put yourself in a better mood, and exercise always does that, is going to beget more productivity. And that begets success, right? The more productive you are, obviously within reason, you're more likely to get what you want.
It's so interesting, and I would love to talk about expectations, because we live in a world that everyone is viewable through social media now. And so this whole idea that purpose can only be if I save the world, change the world, or whatever.
I know.
And so it's almost like it's funny about how we translate what purpose really is.
Yes.
Because it's also tied to not enoughness.
Yes.
I felt that not enoughness again from it could be for a multitude of reasons, but it's like, how do you really define purpose? And
yes, I'm so glad that you brought that up. So 2 things I say in the book. I say that purpose doesn't have to be glamorous and no one has to understand it. And I think it's so hard, like you said, in this very visual culture, right? Hustle culture, where if you didn't Instagram it, it didn't happen, right? Like, that saying, that old saying, like, if you didn't hear it, like, the tree in the forest type thing, like, did it really fall or whatever that, and that's how I feel, unfortunately, that with Instagram and social media, LinkedIn, whatever it is, that if you're not constantly posting, and it after a while, it can feel depleting, because if you're not getting the hits and the likes and the views and the shares, our sense of self-worth is very much now tied to productivity, and that it is forward-facing, that if we're not getting that approval, and I understand because it's so intimately tied, like especially if you're a creator, those views and hits and likes are your source of income, right? And so it's not just validation, right? But the fact that our productivity and livelihood is tied to our audience and how much our audience loves us and how much our content resonates with that audience, like, that's really hard, because if you think back to 9 to 5 days, or people who don't have social media, or that their life isn't that, I know people I have a friend, she's a psychiatrist. She works in a hospital. She has 0 digital footprint. And to the point, Julian, that I had her read parts of my book that were more psychiatry heavy, like talking about suicide, or I said, I just want to make sure that this is compassionate, scientific, accurate, that does it pass your check. She didn't even want to be thanked in the book. I had to give her an initial. She's like, I don't even want my name. So I'm just saying that there's some people who don't want, and she's one of the happiest people I know. So take with it what you will. I know that it's not possible that we can all go to like a forest and, meditate in the woods forever. We can't do like a Henry David, like a Thoreau life. But maybe like digital detox on a regular basis, disconnecting, going in nature, spending the weekend, recharging with family. If your lifestyle is so embedded in other people's approval, opinions, which it is these days.
And that will also probably give you more clarity on finding that purpose.
Yes.
Because all of a sudden you're not tied so much to the arena of, oh, what will that person think of me, rather than like, what deep down is purpose? Like, what is my heart saying right now?
Yes. And what is your heart saying? And then being okay with it taking as long as it needs to, like if you, and that's why I think surrounding yourself with even at least 1 or 2 other people, maybe who are not even in this industry, who maybe knew you before and who really believe in you and see all your possibility, and they're not feeling threatened by you or competitive, and they're just able to say, keep going, you're doing amazing, keep going, because I feel like we can easily get in our own heads. If you have, for example, 100,000 followers, there's somebody with 1 million, you have 1 million. I know so many influencers because I do so many of these podcasts, right? And these are lovely people, brilliant people. They work their butts off. They have 1 million followers. They're looking at the person with the 5. What did that asshole do? What's so special about him? What the 5 is looking at the 10s. It's like this never ends.
It's ridiculous.
We're chasing a moving target.
Yeah. Unless you're not. I think that's the important thing. And coming back to why, why fundamentally do we do what we do? Going back to this idea of comparison as the thief of joy.
Yes.
It's the fact that when the why is so deep, that it doesn't matter what's going on around you.
Yes. And look, it's human nature to compare. It is totally human nature that even if you are so deeply grounded in the work that you do, let's say there's an opportunity that you didn't get, right? Like, or the job promotion, or you got, like somebody else got chosen over you, and you're like, I know I'm talented. I know I have it in me. And I talk about this in my book. It's in the pillar of being present. And the things that take us out of the present moment are the past, the regret orientation, it's comparisons in the present, and then it's sort of what if and worry about the future. And it's human nature. There's no way to skip it. You could love what you do, and yet, let's say, if you love what you do, you're even, I would say, more prone to things like burnout. By the way, to go on a tangent here, burnout, one of the key features is like cynicism, skepticism, feeling like you're not good at something, feeling like you don't have agency over the work, and kind of getting disenchanted and disillusioned and not loving what you do anymore. And people always assume that it's being given too much work, not clear instructions, and not a lot of support. But somehow the assumption always is you probably don't really like what you do. And maybe that becomes the case, but that's not how it started. You're probably more at risk for burnout if you love what you do so much and then things don't work out the way you wanted them to, or you were overwhelmed by things that you didn't choose, right? Like, it's always good to take challenge and take stress, like all those challenges of choice. But when you didn't choose them, you're not going to be happy. But even if you love what you do, you can be at the mercy of comparison. And it's human nature to say, what does this person have? Why I haven't? I see that all the time in my practice. In fact, that could be why someone comes to see me. I got passed over. I didn't get a promotion, or my dating life isn't going well. Why is everyone else partnered and I'm not? So I think it's totally realistic and natural to think that way, but just recognize that you're doing it, that you're engaging in pessimistic thinking, right? And think of those 4 Ps. Something hasn't happened for me yet. Doesn't mean it's never going to happen. And use envy in a way as, I would say, inspiration, right? Motivation to say, okay, I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to maybe shut my social media off for a while, because social media is giving you comparisons to 6 to 10 billion people if you allow it to, like at any given moment. Like before, our reference point used to be our class in our school, these 15, 20 people, right? Or our 15 to 20 coworkers. And now we're comparing ourselves to people we have never met in our lives. And we know absolutely nothing about them other than the highlight reel that they choose to very carefully curate. And again, I'm Julian. I'm going to tell you this, not that I'm not naming names, but I have met, let's say if we have our top 100 wellness influencers, I know the real story, but partly because some of them might be my patients and they're not as happy as or successful, or however you define success. Sure, they might have it by the metrics and the best-selling books and the money that they're getting when they're going to speaking gigs. And so external metrics of success. But a lot of them are really unhappy. Their relationships are not going that great. So my point just is, I have a very different purview of human happiness because I see the CEOs that people think. I see them in my office, right? Nobody knows their inner working. So all of this just to say, you never know the whole story. And allow yourself the possibility that not because you want this person to be miserable or need them to for your own happiness or joy, just to say, I don't know the whole story. So I'm going to take all I know about them, which is just the surface level success, and ask how if this is, can I reach out to this person and say, do you mind if, if they're at a conference, do you have 15 minutes? I would love to understand a little bit more. Or maybe you've gotten some of their PR people, or you spoke to their social media person, or somehow you got an idea of how do they get there, and create a path for yourself that inspires you. Use that, envy or jealousy to your benefit.
Okay, so we've covered purpose. From purpose, you have number 2 all the way to 8.
Yes.
I know that our listeners can definitely check out all of the 8 stages in your book, Practical Optimism, but are there any few that you would like to highlight right now?
Yes. So, purpose is like starting with your intention and your vision. The last pillar is about practicing healthy habits, but really it's just the execution of the goal. And the 6 in between are like all the ways to get there, right? Like the next one is processing emotions. And anytime you're going to do a project, if you're not aware how your emotions are either working for you or working against you in the execution of that goal, and to not be aware of them, you're doing yourself a disservice. So I would say there's a 4-step plan. I mean, there's more about processing emotions here, but if I was to give you a cheat sheet, it would be when you're experiencing distressing emotions or you just feeling bad and you don't know what's happening, I ask people to name the antecedent, claim it. Where in the body are you feeling the stress and the tension? Is it in your jaw? Is it in your shoulders? Tame it. How do you self-soothe in a healthy way? Because a lot of times people are turning to substances, alcohol, food, sex, gambling, and all of these things provide temporary relief and maybe even a little bit pleasure, a little bit escapism. And I'm not opposed to healthy escapism, right? Like you're watching a funny movie, maybe you're doing like going for a run. So distraction and escapism can also be healthy in small doses. We don't want you to completely avoid your emotions, but sometimes self-soothing is a 1-minute meditation. Sometimes it's taking a nap. Sometimes it's going for a walk, brisk walk. That's really powerful for me. Walking has so many benefits. It's very therapeutic from a mental health, physical standpoint of view. So name it, claim it, tame it The last one is the most powerful. It's reframe it. So if something negative happened to you, ask yourself, how am I going to feel about this a year from now? How am I going to feel about it 5 years from now? Is it still going to matter? What is an alternative perspective? How else can I look at this differently? Is it, what is the best case scenario? What is the worst case scenario? What's the most likely scenario? Because our mind jumps to conclusions. But say to yourself, okay, well, what's the best, what's the worst, and what's the most likely thing, sort of in the middle? And reframing it, I always say to people that sometimes we can't find a silver lining. So in that case, ask yourself, is this a problem to be solved or a truth to be accepted? Because not everything is going to have a solution. Not everything is going to have a silver lining, and that's okay. So that's processing emotions in a nutshell. I mean, there's more to it. I give people cognitive distortions, all the negative biases that our mind are going to go to, and all of us do every single one of them. Some people have 5 out of, I give like 18 or 20. Some people have a tendency to see the glass as half full, have to see other people as half full. So there's like 15 or 20 negative cognitive biases. And then I give a list of ways to reframe them. And so I don't want anyone to walk away and be like, oh, MG, this is so overwhelming and so daunting. It's literally, it's a language, right? Nobody would expect to be fluent in any language, but it's like somebody telling you there is a manual on health, on well-being, on success. This is the practice. This is how you go about doing it. And you take it step by step. When I wrote this book, I wanted to give people the benefit of a book that I had that was shared with me early on, and it's called Wherever You Go, There You Are, by John Kabat-Zinn. And this is a book that I have literally kept by my nightstand in every New York City apartment I have ever lived in. It has traveled the world with me. I have gifted it to so many people. And my goal was one day, I said there have been like a handful of books that have had so much life-changing impact or just a way of self-soothing. There's so much wisdom. Like in my darkest moments, I've turned and found wisdom. And I was, like a teenager. And I said, I want to do that for somebody else. One day I want to write a book that somebody will keep by their nightstand, that they keep coming back to as a constant companion in their life, that when they don't know what to do, that they'll open the book and they'll say, I remember this line really resonated with me. This provided me solace. I have people who, the practical optimism has gone into a dozen languages worldwide. And I get emails from people to say, you helped me through, or my father had cancer, this, that. And so it was so humbling and touching to know that people you'll never met in your life and never be able to come see you, travel to, your office, will never be your patient, but that you've changed their life in some way. So I want to be a constant. I want practical optimism. It's a program. You have to practice it. Some days it's a 5-minute practice. Some days it's longer. So just keep in mind, if this feels like too much information, it's because it is, right? And some people may say, I already know all this stuff. And I would say, great, right? But are you practicing it, right?
Let's take the 4-step approach, the 4-step plan for processing emotions with a practical example. Let's say, for example, we've just come off air and the AV engineer didn't turn on the record button. We've lost the recording. And I'm pissed off. I'm like, what the hell's happened? How do I go about trying to process my emotions?
Yeah, so I've been there. I gave a talk once and none of it recorded. And, the immediate tendency, depending on who you are, might be to beat yourself up, or might be to get really mad at the other person and be like all sorts of thoughts like, why is this person incapable? I should have done my due diligence. I should have double checked. So I think women especially internalize and they beat themselves up, even when something is somebody else's fault. At least that is something very familiar to me. And one of the pillars, and all of these pillars work in conjunction with each other, right? So in this case, the name it, claim it, I'll just go through it, but there's another pillar of self-compassion, pride, that's going to be really important here. So the naming it is, I lost a recording, right? That's the trigger, right? And the claiming it is, my heart is racing, I am mad, I'm fuming, I'm turning red. How did I let this happen? Why did I not ask the person to double check? Why didn't I do my whose fault is it? Like shame and blame, right? And then taming it is, all right, let me get a drink of water. Let me go get cool air. For me, I might call like a really good friend and vent. Like I think for women, venting, I think men and women handle emotions differently. A lot of men will say, I just want to be on my own. I don't want to talk to anybody. I'm so mad. I don't even know who to talk to or what to say. I don't need to talk to anyone. Like, just give me time, right? Like some people may just retreat inwards and they just don't want to be bothered. And they say, I know this will pass. in due time. And I will be fine. And I don't need to have a whole conversation about it.
Yeah.
Other people may say, no, I want to talk. I want to vent. I want a sympathetic ear. And I would call a friend that would be like, man, I'm so sorry. Man, Sue, that sucks. Like, like, that's like, what can I do to help? Like a good friend would say that. But if you don't have anyone, then the reframing is, which I learned when I did this talk and it didn't record the volume. I got the video, but not the volume. So then my brain goes into problem solving mode. Okay, who were the friends that were there that day? And believe it or not, Julian, you're not going to believe this, but like, I sent out a mass message between all my friends. We were somehow able to clip. Somebody had the first 3 minutes. Somebody had the middle 3 minutes of it. And granted, it took, and I got help. And like, luckily, someone I was working with was like, you just give it to me. I'll piece it together. So
Yeah.
in that moment of frustration, like, and this is just a simple example of, like in whatever field you're in, you put a lot of time and energy and effort. This was like it was a big deal. It was a big talk. There were a lot of people there. And, as women, you do your hair and your makeup, and we had video. We had so many people recording. There was so much going on that day. And this was one other camera that, it failed, like the audio part. Anyway, so you say to yourself, self-compassion is a big part of it, because I was really beating myself up. It was a new mic and I hadn't tested everything. And I'm like, again, shame and blame. Is it my fault? Is it the person who was in charge? They should have tested it. It didn't matter, because at the end of the day, the fact was still the same. It happened. And the reframing is, okay, well, Sue, that'll never happen again. You're going to get there even earlier. You're not going to overschedule yourself. You're going to leave yourself, like you go through the troubleshooting. So for me, my takeaway is always, what can I do better, differently? Or in this solution, stop sitting there feeling sorry for yourself, right? You have a lot of good friends who are there, a lot of good people, and somehow, you can sit in your perseverate, or you can start into your troubleshooting mode. So I think it's both, because I think some people automatically go into troubleshooting mode, but they don't process the emotions. And then it ends up coming out in the form of autoimmune disorders. I'm talking not one situation, but like, let's say people who in a lifetime tend to suppress, avoid, right? They're not confronting failure, loss, challenge. There are a lot of people who have 50 losses and never going to learn from them, right? I'm the kind of person, if I screw up once, I'm like, oh, how do, and I'm the opposite. Maybe I'm too hard on myself.
Yeah.
And that's where the pride, self-compassion comes in, is 5-minute brief, exercise, which is, and this is based on the work of Kristen Neff, who talks a lot about, done a lot of research on self-compassion, is ask yourself, am I alone? Am I the only person in the entire world who's ever screwed up like this? No. So there's an element of calming humanity, mindful acceptance, right? And what I add, my own spin, is like, now what? So acceptance of it, awareness of the negative self-talk. The common humanity piece is the biggest, because I somehow hold myself to this ridiculous standard of, no, but you're not supposed to. You know better, right? Like, because I think if you have that cynicism or pessimism, the healthy kind, you're always trying to solve for problems, anticipate, especially women and moms. We're always trying to solve for problems that haven't happened yet, right? And if you're a parent, you're a protector, and you have to be able to think 5 steps ahead. So if your kid is standing near the train station tracks, maybe your child has never fallen in, but your brain has to start thinking in every scenario, 5 steps ahead. What if, what if, what if? And that's no way to live, right? And so some of us take that to every context, and that's also no way to live.
Away from the 8 Ps, you've got these 4 Ms around healthy habits. You've got meaningful engagement, mastery, mindfulness, and movement. Can you just explain to us those 4, but also in a practical example as well?
Yes. So if these are 4 science-backed habits, and quick funny story, or maybe not so funny, but it was during the height of the pandemic. It was April 2020, and I get a call from Global Citizen, and they're saying we're doing this one night at home live worldwide screening or streaming of all these performances. You're going to have like J-Lo and Elton John and Rolling Stone. And I was like, awesome. Okay. And it'll be on all 3 channels and all late night hosts and Lady Gaga and UNICEF and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, great, I'll be watching. And they're like, no, we want you to participate. And I was like, participate? I don't sing or dance, or like, not a rock and roll musician. Like, I don't think I can help you. And they're like, no, we want like a mental health voice to the show. And we want to talk about like something that can make people hopeful, because New York City was reaching the peak of its death toll, even though it was a worldwide global program. But that time in history was really significant, because we were all looking ahead at, okay, well, if it's coming to New York, then, the rest of the country, what's going to happen? So I said, okay, great. You want inspiration, motivation, tips, self-care? How long do I have? Like an hour? And they're like, no, you only have 59 seconds. And I was like, dude, 59 seconds. And I remember calling my dad, and my dad's a psychiatrist. And I said, Dad, what do you say that's hopeful, motivating, this, that, in 59 seconds? And he's like, it only takes a minute to save someone's life. And then he hung up the phone. And I was like, Yoda, you got to give me some more information there. Like, what do you mean a minute? And so I thought, what does my dad do that's healthy habits that are life-changing, that are explain his exceptional longevity? We said that optimists live longer and longer in good health, and he's in perfect health. And he's pushing 90, but he looks, 20 years younger. And he does these 4 things every day. And they became a part of my life. Then they became prescription that I give my patients. And so I said, that is what I'm going to talk about on this 59-second global program, that people are at home who are feeling hopeless. And what can I do for my mental health? Because I remember that time, mental health used to be a niche topic. And then it exploded where everyone wanted to talk about it. So if you can only do these 4 things every day, give yourself 10 minutes. If you have more time. Mastery. You do not have to be a master to experience mastery, but mastery is so important to have a sense of flow, and it also takes you out of your own rumination. So that default mode network that is ruminating and festering, and it's always on in the background. When you're focused on a task called being task positive, your norepinephrine is building in the brain. As long as the task is not so hard that you're going to get frustrated, and not so easy that you're going to get bored. And there's this inverted U-shaped curve where the peak is flow state when something is just above your natural ability level. So mastery could be anything that you want to learn. It could be learning a sport, a music, a skill. It could be yoga, but it's got to be something you're interested in and that you find challenging. It could be chess, anything. Movement, so important. So, like we have social snacking, which is small water cooler conversations, micro connections. I think the same thing about exercise snacking. 10 or 15 minutes, 4 times a day. Get up. We know that squats, if you can do 10 of them per hour, every hour, if you're in a seated position. 2 strength training exercises for 30 minutes. Start with the bar low and continue increasing from there. Walking, 2 30-minute sessions a day, if not 1 30-minute session a day. 5 to 7 days a week, but movement absolutely has to have a part in your life, both a combination of aerobic and strength training for neural plasticity, for increasing gray matter, for memory, for concentration, for cognition, for prevention of dementia, for mood, everything across the board. Like exercise is truly the most potent medicine on earth. Obviously exercise, I would say food and sleep. So we've hit mastery, movement. Meaningful engagement is going deep. So I'm a big believer in both having activity partners, micro connections. So you don't have to this person doesn't have to be your best friend for you to go on a walk with them, but just someone to pass the time with, companionship. But then also have good friends, even 1 or 2 that you can bare your soul to. We absolutely, in this world, we were talking about competitiveness. All of that can increase our cortisol and fight or flight. We constantly feel, even when we're surrounded by people who might be our colleagues, there's a perceived threat. Does this person have something I don't have? Are they going to take this opportunity? This scarcity mentality. And I feel like meaningful engagement boosts oxytocin, and you just feel like relaxed. Like the person that you feel like you can fall asleep. I always joke, my husband always falls asleep when I start talking. And I think part of it, like we joke, I talk a lot, right? And he's like, I just can't focus. I'm sorry, I'm here. I'm tired. Like we have young kids, but I think it's also safety. I don't take it personally.
I feel that as well.
Yeah, like psychological safety. It's therapeutic. And I've been told my voice is soothing and relaxing. And he recorded the audiobook. And I joke with people, just don't drive and listen. And because a lot of people, I'll have our guy friends, many of whom are physicians, they'll say, like, the only time I can listen to Sue's book is on my commute to my job. And I'm like, as long as it doesn't put you to sleep and you're not operating heavy machinery, but meaningful engagement is going deep and being at ease. And the person who you could take a nap with is probably, or in front of, and you wouldn't be embarrassed falling asleep, or that being in their company makes you feel relaxed, safe. Think of that as a sign that this person is good for your nervous system. And the last one is mindfulness. And in whatever way that you feel that you can focus on something, single-mindedly. And I think, multitasking is great, But you're not really that efficient. Like, we're not accomplishing that much more. And I feel like even if it's drinking a cup of coffee in silence, giving yourself 5 minutes, building in time, like that is mindfulness. You're eating something, allow good taste in your mouth, just enjoy, be present, be fully present in a conversation. Stop thinking about what you're going to say next, what you're going to do next. I did that dry float experience while I was here, and it was very interesting to have never done it before. In the first few minutes, my mind is racing and of all the things that I have to do. And then I want to say 10 minutes in, I just felt so relaxed. Like, it's almost like the parasympathetic nervous system took over and it said, you're safe. And it almost felt like I was in utero again, and it reminded me of this isn't what it must feel like to be a baby and you're weightless and suspended and fluid, or I don't know. But mindfulness is just doing something single-mindedly, and it could be a 1-minute deep breathing exercise that you do several times a day. So again, the 4 M's of mental health are movement, mindfulness, mastery, and meaningful engagement. And if you can do each one of these 10 minutes a day, a few times a week, but write it down, right? Put it in your notes section, put it in your calendar, because it's not going to happen. But I have literally written this on when we used to have old school prescription pads, and now everything is electronic. But I would write it down, as a prescription. And I'm like, you need to figure out, treat it like a doctor's appointment.
Moving forward, I want to go into your crystal ball.
Yeah.
What does the world look like to you by 2030? You're seeing in the busiest city on the Western world.
Yes.
The dysfunction, the dysregulation, disconnection.
Yes.
Are you optimistic about where the world is going?
I think we have to make major changes, like, really fast. I feel that, at least in the United States, there's this great feeling of political divisiveness, lack of trust with authority figures, with government, amongst family members. Like, the last several years have been very contentious politically. And I think we have to get back to basics. I love when I think of what's happening in the next several years. I do think that AI has the ability to do so much good. But if we don't figure out where it fits into our lives, and that if we lose our humanity and our humility, I feel like we're going to be screwed. So I feel like if we can go back to basics and understand that we have an interconnectedness to other people, that we have an interconnectedness to nature, to society, to a higher being, if you will, but that we must find unity. And if you don't find common ground with other people, and there's always been divisiveness politically, going back to the beginning of time, right? So when I see things happening in the world, it makes me really sad, and I think practical optimism is something that needs to be adopted on a macro level, on a societal level, because a fundamental theme is kindness, respect, humility, duty, service. It is mindset. Yes, it is individual. But, one thing that I was raised with, coming from a South Asian background, my parents would always tell me that in the West, the goal is for somebody to go from being a dependent as a child to being independent as an adult. And that was it. And we live in a very hyper independent culture where there's this emphasis on self-reliance. And it has actually been researched that is correlated with higher suicide rates. That in a society where people don't feel like they can ask each other for help, that it's a sign of weakness, that we should just figure it out ourselves. Those societies are going to be more depressed and have more suicide rates. And my parents raised me with this idea that you're supposed to going from being dependent to, yes, independent, but also interdependent, and then eventually dependable. That your end goal is to be able to help other people. And if you are going about your day and only thinking about yourself, there will come a time where you will be absolutely miserable if you're not already. So I'm just saying that I'm not saying this to be, a mean person, but I do, the vanity that we're going through right now as a culture, especially with social media, of everyone is so fascinated in optimizing how they look, how they come across, status, all of that. So that's what I'm afraid of. Those are my concerns. And, I don't know where if we don't do something fast and we don't get the education and the information out there, it won't look good for us.
When you think about optimism and AI, do you think AI will lead to more optimism?
I think it depends on how it's used. I know that in the therapy sense that there's been a lot of articles about people who we have a broken system when it comes to mental health, that people are not diagnosed early enough. There are almost, at least in the United States, very few resources. I get calls all the time where somebody says, my 17-year-old, 19-year-old got diagnosed with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. And these are real chronic medical mental illnesses that require a lot of support, structure, funding, not just from the family, but like the community in terms of the chronic illnesses, and it affects your brain and your decision-making capacity and your judgment. If you have a liver disease, your brain is working enough to say, hey, like, we need to go to the doctor. Let's get a checkup. Let's get those liver function tests. Let's change the way our diet is. Let's take a medication every day. But when you have a brain disease, the very organ that's responsible for your judgment or your insight to take the pill, to go to the doctor, to get the help, that's dysfunctional. And you don't have that ability. And so if family members feel so like brokenhearted that they can't get, that somebody might be in treatment, but if they decide to drop out, there's nothing you can do, or if there's a chronic addiction. So I think AI can be such a useful tool in terms of data. And I do hope, this is what I am optimistic about, is that if we can use AI to detect very early on, whether through brain scans, whether through eye movements, through very subtle signs very early on, not to stigmatize or pathologize children. And there's a lot of families who are like, nope, I don't need you to label my child. But I do think that there is such power in early intervention. And I'm not necessarily talking about medication. I'm just talking about, things like Head Starts, which are like educational programs getting kids preschool, education. So if we can get intervention early on, and to me, the whole, prevention is, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of gold, 1,000%. When we look at adverse childhood events, like most kids will have one of these, like a family member that's incarcerated, family member without mental health treatment, who never got diagnosed, domestic violence, addiction in the family, divorce, loss of a parent. Like most kids will have 3, 4, 5 of these. And we know that they're correlated with every possible poor outcome known to man, from obesity to heart disease to mental health issues. And so if we can think about how do we prevent poverty, incarceration, food, hunger, like all of these things, like on a macro level, and design services to prevent them. If you can help take care of maternal mental health, you provide for a woman screenings and testing while she is pregnant, you will improve the outcome in utero of that child. So moms that smoke, moms that are using substances, their children will end up having brain problems. We know that moms who smoke, the kids end up having more ADHD and conduct disorder and behavioral problems. So that's just one example of, you really have to start very, very early in sort of, the upstream, if you will.
So fascinating. I would love just to round things off. We have a real disconnect from our ancient wisdom and a lot of culture, especially in the West. When I think about the UK and the US, I think one of the main reasons these two countries are going through such political strife right now is because there is a real identity crisis. Like, what does it mean to be British or American? Is it Christian values? Is it multicultural? Is it this amalgamation of the beautiful diversity that these countries have been created from? I feel that, when I think about East Asian cultures, when I think about my family in the Mediterranean or the Middle East, they're rooted more. And so they're able to educate their children in a way that, this is how we've done things. Yeah. So when I think about social media and I think about how difficult it is for the younger generation now to figure out like what's right, what's wrong, it's like, how do we move forward without going too far back as well? How do we take what we've learned?
Yes.
And also kind of root it in ancient wisdom and yeah. So it's tough. And I think this is why there's such a big political crisis right now in the US.
Yes. That's so beautiful, Julian, because you're hitting on so many points of like, where do we belong, right? And belonging is a basic human need. And also to be able to rely on wisdom of the elders. And the problem is that in society that values youth way too much, we end up shunning our elders. And I think that when we look at the ancient cultures or the East, people used to live in multi-generational families. Like, so my dad is a big part of helping raise my kids. And I love that because, they almost get to see the perspective of the world in the last 90 years, right? Like, when do you ever get that on a daily basis? My dad will say, I was born in the late 1930s, so I can tell you what happened. I saw the first airplane. I saw the first radio, all of these things. And also, older people have such perspective and wisdom because they're like, everything you're going through, I have seen it 50 times, every decade, so there's a certain calmness that they're like, this too shall pass, or that they don't get all riled up because they're like, yes, this war happened, but I've seen 7 wars, right? But, there's something to be said that there was a study that said that people who have seen every war from World War II, Korean, Vietnam to present day will say that now is the most stressful time in history than any other previous generation. So it's not as if the older folks are saying, well, we had it hard too. They're like, no, I think you have it harder than we do. So there is truth to that. But I would say, as much as possible, if you were to ask me, what is the secret sauce to happiness? I can tell you, Julian, that this is one secret that almost no one is tapping into, and it's free. It's multi-generational friendships. That when I look at people, the cute 20-year-old, girlies, they're, for us in Manhattan, it's the West Village, and they all go to Pilates and the matcha, right? I love these girls.
Are you trying to tell us that you're not one of them? I'm one of them as well, so.
But they're only hanging out with people their own age, right? Like, I have patients who are like, they'll joke. I mean, they'll not joke, but like, this one patient of mine, she's like 25, and she's like, oh my God, the guy she's dating is so old. And I was like, how old is he? And she's like, 31, and so when you're 25, like, even someone who's 5 years older, but that age gap shrinks. But one thing that's been really instrumental in my life is I've kept in touch with so many of my mentors, so like teachers along the way. So I have friends who are literally, I would say 25 to, 80. And I'll have coffee with them, or maybe meet in a group, or like, we'll be like, so it's not like, the 20-year-old I'm not necessarily sharing my life secrets with, but we'll get together like in a group setting to be like, okay, I'm going to this health talk or whatever. Right. And the older mentors, like, if they're not physically up for it, I might just visit them at home and we'll have tea or order lunch. And so, meet your friends where they're at physically and mentally in their life. But it's so important to surround yourself with people from every generation. So I'm learning from people younger than me, and I love it. They'll be like, do you know about this app? And do you know about this trend and this new exercise class? And this is what's happening in the dating world. And so that keeps me current. And I also learn a lot from my patients. But the wisdom and the groundedness of people older than you, there is nothing in the world like it, and they love you for who you are. They're not bought into this whole social media nonsense, and they'll be able to give you the ground to walk on when you feel like you've been knocked off or, off course. They'll because they're not into this. They see like kind of more of a holistic perspective.
No. Back to wisdom. If you could leave our listeners with one parting piece of advice, what would it be?
So, one question that we ask people, are you naturally optimistic or pessimistic? Do you see the glass as half empty or as half full? And what I've learned is that it doesn't matter, is the glass half empty or half full? Practical optimists know that there's always free refills.
Yeah.
The glass was always refillable. So I want people to feel empowered after this conversation and know that it doesn't matter which way you tend to skew, you must refill your glass with positivity, with hope, and with action and activism, right? Because our world needs activism, it needs advocacy, it needs people who believe in the best, right? But also people who believe that there is a common humanity, right? That underneath we all have insecurities and struggles. And the more you can seek out another person's perspective and understand, because I feel like we've gotten very siloed in our communities and in our thinking. Once a week, once a month, and you share this with me, you're like, I listen to people's podcasts from all different points of views. I want to understand. So I love that, and I would encourage more people to do that. But just know that doesn't matter. If your glass, we started out the conversation to say, how do you tend to see the glass half full or half empty? And I would say, not only is the glass refillable, but it is your job, right? It is incumbent upon you to refill your glass. So nurture yourself, go through the 8 pillars. I give people a quiz in the beginning of the book. There's 40 questions and 5 questions per pillar. And it allows you to see, where do I need to work? Because I would encourage people to understand and read all 8 of them, but just know that maybe 1 or 2, like I know for me, the self-compassion, the pride, that's what I struggle with. I don't struggle like interpersonally. I love people. I love talking. And of course I struggle, there's no perfect friendship or relationship. But that was the one that I have to come back to time and time again. So there's going to always be one that resonates with your like purpose. I wake up every morning loving, so this is not work.
We're very similar. Yeah.
Like I feel called. It feels like a calling.
Absolutely. Sue, thank you so much for spending time with me today. And
My
for
pleasure.
anyone who hasn't read your amazing book, Practical Optimism, The Art, Science and Practice of Exceptional Wellbeing, it is available now. So I'll leave the links in the bio as well.
Thank you so much. So great talking to you, Julian. You're like walking encyclopedia and wisdom yourself. And you have that wisdom, like that deep sense. So I love what you're doing and, wishing you all the best and excited to see the podcast everywhere and for people to listen to this, but your other episodes because you have a lot to offer.
Well, so much, Sue.
If you want to know what tomorrow has in store like I do, you definitely want to listen to our recent episode where I talked to Peter Diamandis about a future where we could live forever. Thank you so much.